Now, I witnessed the courage of your pilots. I have never seen such superb and courageous flying in my entire life, and I've seen a lot of air forces fly all over Europe, but your pilots were superb. Now, the Falklands Malvinas War was largely an air war. I understand how valiant your infantry were, but they were not the problem to us. It was your aircraft. If you consider the damage done to Britain by your Air Force, it was immense. The amount of ships sunk and the damage caused, and just the daily fear of those air attacks. That was what was the big problem for us. Again, with all due respect to your infantry, we knew where they were, we had them where we wanted, and we could, to a large extent, control them. The same can't be said for your Air Force. We never knew when they would pop up, when they would attack, what kind of damage they would done. They not only hindered us, they slowed us down, but they absolutely were the biggest problem during the whole war. Argentina took on one of the major superpowers in the world, and though it pains me to admit it, they gave us a bloody nose and they fought courageously. So instead of looking on this as a defeat when your soldiers returned, you should have been celebrating in the streets for their courage and everything they done and the loss, and celebrated the loss of your soldiers for what they done.
5 years on, I'm going back. Am I going back to hell or am I not? That's the big question, because it was bloody hell down there.
But the tranquility of today belies the terror of the past. During the task force landings, San Carlos was known as Bomb Alley. Several ships were sunk by Argentinian aircraft, killing 60 servicemen and injuring hundreds more.
Last time I was here, there was jets flying along here, and Jane, there was people being killed. Jane, every day we were here, people were dying. You were scared. Jane, it was so frightening, and you were so young.
Antrim was hit at lunchtime on the first day. But the bombs went straight through her without exploding. Royal Engineer bomb disposal expert John Phillips was dispatched to defuse them.
The Argentine bombs were not exploding because the pilots were too brave. They were coming in too low. They weren't giving it sufficient flying time for the bomb to arm in the air, which is what it's supposed to do, before they hit the target.
Wave after wave of Argentine planes attacked the British warships.
We saw a strike on one of the Royal Navy ships, and we discovered it was ardent. It was a very dramatic moment, because I never thought I'd see a Royal Navy ship on fire being abandoned.
In the afternoon, HMS Argonaut was struck. The ship's ammunition was set off, killing 2 ratings. One of them was just 18 that day. By day's end, 3 Royal Naval ships were out of action, and 2 more had unexploded bombs below decks.
Because they were extremely bravely handled and very determined people.
At dawn, after 4 hours of fighting, they encountered the main Argentine defensive positions behind a line of gorse across Darwin Hill.
Our attack started to falter at that point, really, as we encountered the resistance of that defensive line.
David Abels was a young corporal.
There was chaos. It was chaos everywhere. Fighting up the gully itself.
Take move! My left!
A couple of the section commanders from 2 platoon had been either killed or injured. But we could see something like 17 or 18 trenches at the top of the hill. So what we were trying to do was go up to the top of the hill and look for the best place to attack these trenches from. And at the top was the sniper. But every time we went up, we lost people with headshots, and that's why we know it was the sniper. And we were up and down this hill for about 7 or 8 times, and we always lost or got somebody injured in the process.
The Paras hadn't slept for 2 grueling days, and casualties were mounting.
The gamble on Chris's part was that we were relying on the Argentines not knowing exactly how few we were. And we were very, very few. We were few when we started, and by the time we'd reached this stage of the battle, we were well down in our numbers. I think had they known how few we were, they may well have decided to continue fighting.
Really, the atmosphere in the company was electric, because to that point, the enemy had not opened fire at all, and we didn't know at what stage he was going to open fire and with what. People were walking forward not knowing whether it was going to be a burst of machine gun fire, whether it was going to be a sniper, artillery fire, perhaps a mortar bomb landing down beside them, or whether they were going to tread on a mine. And we went forward for about 300 metres like this, just not knowing. And the question was soon answered, because when the Argentinians did open fire, they opened fire with everything they had, and from about 300 metres range, it was really quite cleverly done. And as we went to ground, we were taking casualties already. 13 platoon up in the rocks from the snipers with very good night sights who were starting to pick them off, and down with the platoon that I was with by the heavy machine gun fire to our front. Because we were taking quite a few prisoners, wounded Argentinians, and because we were also taking a number of casualties ourselves, by the time we actually got to the top of the mountain, there were only 7 of us. And I was so amazed by what I saw, because the lights were still on. You could see the plan of the streets. You could see car headlights moving up and down the street, that we stood absolutely stock still. And at that moment, an Argentinian machine gun opened up about 100 metres to our front, and 4 of those 7 men were shot, including the platoon commander who was with me.
Tell me about the moment when you were hit in the Falklands at Tumbledown.
Well, the battalion had fought the battle of Tumbledown. The majority of the battle was over. It was essential that we took the mountain before daylight, because the Argentinian artillery positions in Stanley, if they'd kept us on the mountain during daylight, they could have taken us out and counterattacked, knocking potentially the whole of the British forces back across the island and winning the war. So it was absolutely essential that we won that mountain that night. The battalion was stopped by an extremely heavy machine gun post on the end of Tumbledown Mountain. It had done enormous damage to the company before mine, and my company was called in to try and sort it out. Well, I led the attack on it, and we took it out, and we won that specific point. But I realized that we'd lost all our momentum. You know, we had our first wounded, our first Argentinian prisoners in our hands, and the boys stopped. I mean, we came to a grinding halt. We then came under severe sniper fire. So I took a couple of my men, and we went and took out the snipers. Unfortunately, the last one I didn't see, ran past him, and the one other man with me ran past him as well. He shot us both from behind. What concerned me was a number of incidents happened over a period of time when I returned, and I had what I call a cynical awakening. And I realized that what was happening was that they were adapting these images, censoring these images, and being very clever with these images to ensure that the whole international incident portrayed the incident that they wanted. It portrayed victors, not victims. It portrayed a joyous occasion that we should all celebrate and that we should all be very proud of. Now I happen to believe that we should be proud as a serviceman of having done such a good job. I believe that a lot of the principles and standards that I've been brought up to believe in are still quite correct. What I discovered was that I feel that the rulers weren't believing in those principles and standards themselves. That came out in the version of For instance, on my return, no wounded were allowed, no press were allowed to be there to meet the wounded, which was step one. I then discovered that a certain number of wounded seemed to have been hand-picked because they had what was seen as the right image wound. You know, they had a limp, they had the action man scar, whatever, and they were then photographed. So the wounded
You weren't?
Not the people who were badly burnt or lost limbs, or in my case, had a large hole in my head.
The final bombardment brought the guns down to their last half-dozen shells. There was a naval bombardment too, but the task force had suffered such heavy damage that the ships couldn't provide the gunfire support that had been planned. The British were worried they might have to fight through the streets. Had the Argentines known that the British were on their last legs logistically, with the Navy almost unable to guarantee the supply line any longer, perhaps they would have fought on.